This is part 3. I'm going to go ahead and start this video.
Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. The 12 tribes of Israel. If you know your Bible, odds are pretty good you've heard of them. But how much do we really know about these tribes, and what happened to them? From nearly the beginning of the Hebrew Bible's vision of history, the 12 tribes are the most common and most consistent definition of who the people of Israel are. 12 sons are born to the patriarch Jacob between Genesis 29 and 35, and before the end of the book, they travel down to Egypt. 400 years later, 12 tribes follow Moses out in a grand exodus. They conquer Canaan and divide the land into 12 different parts. Then they're led by the judges, then by kings David and Solomon, and at that point, according to 1 Kings chapter 11, the kingdom of Israel splits in two. But even this division is described explicitly in tribal terms. 10 of the tribes form the northern kingdom, which keeps the name Israel, while the remainder form a new kingdom called Judah. What happens next is disaster. Roughly 200 years later, the Assyrians conquer the kingdom of Israel and take its people into exile, from which they supposedly never return. This event sparks the legend of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. What happened to them? Although the Bible itself barely touches this subject, for thousands of years people have speculated about answers to that question. Did they stay in Assyria or go deeper into Asia? Did they travel to Africa, as some Ethiopians say? Or did they cross into some mystical geography across the legendary river Sambation? In addition to these legends of where the 10 lost tribes might have gone, there are many groups who have claimed to be Israel, almost always claiming to be one or more of the lost tribes. So even now, there are self-proclaimed Israels all over the world, a phenomenon totally unparalleled in the history of any other identity. What's going on here? Let's start with the historical origins of the legend. Are the 12 tribes of Israel even historical in the first place? Well, historians debate this question. The evidence suggests, early on, there were some number of tribes of some sort, but the exact number of tribes, and what the tribes were actually called, differs depending on which biblical text you read. For example, Deuteronomy 33, an early text called the Blessing of Moses, claims to bless all the tribes of Israel, but leaves out the tribe of Simeon. The most striking example, though, is Judges chapter 5, or the Song of Deborah, which many scholars believe is the oldest text in the entire Hebrew Bible. This chapter describes a war between the king of Canaan and many of the tribes mentioned by name. However, only 10 tribes are mentioned, including a few not mentioned as tribes elsewhere in the Bible, like the tribe of Gilead. Moreover, Judges 5 is specifically missing the tribes most often associated with the kingdom of Judah: Levi, Simeon, and well, the tribe of Judah itself. Judah is not mentioned in our earliest source. This is important because the vast majority of descriptions of a specifically 12-tribe Israel were not composed in the northern kingdom at all, but in the southern kingdom of Judah. See, after Assyria conquered the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah survived another 136 years until Babylon conquered them in 586. Here, there's another exile, but not an endless one. After the Persians conquer the Babylonians, the Judahites are allowed to return home and rebuild their lives. In time, the descendants will become the Jewish people. And it was during this time, from 722 to after the Babylonian exile, that much of what we know as the Hebrew Bible was composed and edited by the people of Judah. So many scholars now believe that the 12 tribes vision itself is an idealized vision of a pan-Israel identity, an identity created by Judah to include them and raise their profile in Israel's history. This narrative is not completely historical, but it was based on an older, smaller tribal system that actually did exist in early Israel. In fact, some scholars question whether the early Judahites even initially thought of themselves as Israelites at all, or whether later Judahites adopted and adapted an Israelite identity. Inventing an idealized 12-tribe system might have played a crucial part in forming this identity. At the same time, many scholars believe that there really were 12 tribes of Israel early on, which remained important throughout the history of both kingdoms. So the scholarly debate does continue. As for the famous legend of the 10 lost tribes, well, the answer is less complicated. It is true that the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom in 722, and that many of the Israelites were taken into exile at that time. This actual historical event inspired the 10 Lost Tribes legend. However, in recent years, we've realized that 2 Kings chapter 17, the text in the Bible that describes this event in detail, vastly exaggerates how many Israelites were actually removed from the region. In this text, we're told that all the Israelites were taken and replaced by foreign peoples brought in by the Assyrians. In reality, archaeological evidence demonstrates that many Israelites remained behind and likely went on living their lives much as they had before, even though the Assyrians now ruled the region. Many also likely fled south and integrated into the kingdom of Judah. So it's not entirely accurate to think of these deportations as the wholesale removal of the entire local population. The Assyrian Empire's deportation and resettlement policy was very targeted. When Assyrian sources mention who is being deported, they specifically mention the artisans, scholars, and urban elite. As the Assyriologist Karen Radner says, these people were usually dispatched to the Assyrian heartland to generate knowledge and wealth. In other words, the policy was a knowledge industry extraction program, extracting the elite from conquered lands and transplanting them into the imperial center where they were best able to generate wealth for the empire. And this was a well-organized policy by the Assyrian bureaucracy. So all this to say, there were tens of thousands of lost Israelites, but there were never really 10 lost tribes. The Israelites that were lost were likely a cross-section of the urban elite and artisans who ended up in the Assyrian heartland, in what is now northern Iraq. But here it's again useful to remember the role that the Kingdom of Judah played in creating the Bible as we know it. 2 Kings 17 is likely a Judahite effort to downplay the legitimacy of the remaining Israelites of the northern kingdom. So this famous legend may actually be based in an ancient rivalry between competing factions, rather than an uncomplicated recounting of history. But the Bible itself is not very descriptive about this issue. In fact, 2 Kings 17 never even says how many tribes of Israel were lost. In the end, the legend of the 10 lost tribes was a later invention, a creation of early Jewish and Christian authors who exaggerated the exiled Israelites as a vast multitude, and who speculated about what really happened to them. So let's examine those later speculations, because when you ask the question, what happened to the 10 lost tribes, many people to this day have very specific answers, even claiming to be descendants of one or more of those tribes. Why did the
Alright, now that video really goes over kind of what the Lost Tribes really means, and considering that most of the information comes from the Bible, a lot of that can be loose base, but that's basically a summary of what happened. But here we have a little bit more information specifically on the Naphtali.
Now, Deuteronomy 33, the prophecy of Moses for Naphtali, Deuteronomy 33, verse 23, it says, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor, and full with the blessings of the Eternal, possess thou the west and the south. Or as Fenton would translate it, he possesses the tides of the sea. Or, here is one Jewish translation, he shall occupy the sea and the area to its south. Now, anciently, brethren, that was the Sea of Galilee, or Kinnerath. It was an antitype of what Sweden does occupy today. Because today Sweden does occupy the sea, the Gulf of Bothnia and the Baltic, and the area to its south was owned by Sweden until 1721. In fact, Sweden owned parts of North Germany, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania until 1721. And no doubt, even though the political boundaries have changed, there are Swedes still living in these areas today. So there will be some remnant of the Israelites in those.
Alright, so they said that most of the tribe of Naphtali might be in Sweden. As you can see here, this is a present day picture of what Sweden looks like in its surrounding areas. But years ago, if you check this picture out, you can see in the dark green and anything green here, this is what most of Sweden was, most of the territories that they claim. separated and migrated over in these areas. And these two pictures are a past picture of the area by the Sea of Galilee in 1930 BC. Over here we have Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee. And I'll go ahead and go down and show you a present day photo. And with this tool here, thank you, Story Maps, you can kind of compare the two side by side. So as you can see, this is an older picture, and you can't really get an accurate picture of what the world looked like before. So you can kind of see some of the areas in the cities that are renamed and the new spaces that have come about because of present day. I'll take you back up just so you can kind of see the difference of what I'm talking about. The Bethsaida is there. You can see places like Tiberias is still there, Nazareth, of course Mount Tabor is still there, and the Jordan River right next to the Sea of Galilee, of course. And this picture here is actually current day, and it's more or less a little bit more accurate, but it's similar to the one photo from above on the right. This brings us to the conclusion. All cultures and their people have traveled the world at some point, but though we do not know specifically whether Naphtali men went before, we can use our resources to infer where they are now based on what we know. The Naphtali may have been lost, but they will not be forgotten, and are surely still among us to this day. And that's the end of my presentation.